I slapped my 16-year-old son for calling his brother a thief. Then tried to make him confess to a car theft his brother committed because I thought he could handle the consequences better. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. I slapped my 16-year-old son for calling his brother a thief, but what he didn't know was his brother had just stolen a car wearing his clothes, and I was already thinking how to keep him out of prison. I know how that sounds, but before you judge me, I want to explain what happened because at that moment I didn't feel like I was choosing between a good son and a bad one. I felt like I was trying to prevent my family from falling apart completely. It all started that morning with Facundo looking for money in his room. His dad had given him some bills to buy some things, and he said he'd left them in a drawer. He started checking everything. Then he went to the dining room and asked, "Did anyone come into my room?" Jose was sitting eating breakfast. "I don't know. Maybe you lost the money." Facundo looked at him. "I didn't lose it." I told him to keep looking before accusing anyone, but Facundo was already angry. "It's always the same." Jose looked up. "What do you mean?" "That every time something disappears, you're around." I told Facundo to stop. He ignored me. He looked at his brother and said, "You're a thief. You always have been, and Mom knows it." That's when I hit him. It was just one slap. I'm not proud, but it wasn't like I brutally beat him either. I lost my patience. Facundo stared at me with his hand on his face. "You hit me for telling the truth." I replied I wouldn't allow him to treat his brother like that after all Jose had done for us. Facundo laughed. "What did he do? Steal for you?" That hurt more than I want to admit. I ordered him to go to his room. Before he went in, he said, "Someday he's going to do something even you can't cover up." What Facundo didn't know was that had already happened. The night before, Jose had turned 18. He went out with some friends and came back near dawn. He came in with a small cut on his forehead and trembling. As soon as I closed the door, he told me, "Mom, I made a big mistake." I thought he'd been in a fight. No, he'd been drinking and then he'd stolen a car. According to Jose, he just wanted to use it to get back because he was drunk and had no way to return. I don't know how much of that was true. He told me he lost control and crashed. Then he ran away before anyone arrived. I was terrified. The first thing I thought was that now he was 18. He wasn't a minor getting into trouble anymore. This time they could lock him up. The next morning, posts appeared on social media and then images on a local news report. The car's owner had reported the theft. It also said there was about $5,000 inside that had disappeared. Jose swore he never saw that money. Cameras had recorded the person responsible. When I first saw the video, I felt relieved. The face wasn't clear, he had a hood on. Then I looked at the clothes. The sweatshirt seemed familiar. It took me a few seconds. It was Facundo's. Jose had grabbed it without permission before going out. Just as I was still watching the video, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Facundo. "Mom, have you seen my black sweatshirt?" I felt my stomach clench. I turned off my phone. "No, I left it here yesterday." I told him he'd probably taken it to his dad's house. Facundo said no. Jose appeared behind him and avoided looking at him. Luckily, Facundo didn't insist too much. He went back to his room looking for the sweatshirt. I stayed looking at Jose. "Why did you wear that?" I didn't think. I told him he couldn't keep doing stupid things. Jose replied, "What do you want me to do now?" I didn't know how to answer him. Throughout that day, I kept reviewing the video. Jose and Facundo were never identical, but they were similar in height and from behind. They could be confused, and the cough clothes did the rest. I knew thinking that was wrong, but I also knew Jose already had previous problems and that this time no one would treat him like a kid. Facundo, on the other hand, was 16. And as I watched that video for the 5th time, I understood something I was very ashamed to think. With that sweatshirt on, Jose could perfectly pass for Facundo. I don't want it to seem like I started thinking that because I hated Facundo or because I wanted to ruin his life. Both are my sons. The problem is that since they were little, they grew up in completely different situations. Jose and Facundo have different fathers. For years I was with Facundo's father, but I made a mistake and cheated on him with Jose's father. When he reappeared in my life, I know it was wrong. I don't need anyone to explain it to me. But Jose's father made me believe that this time he would stay. He didn't. When Facundo's father found out, he left me. I tried to fix it later, but he had already made a decision. And in the end, I was the one left with 2 boys and all the bills. Facundo's father continued to help with his son, but he always made it clear that this help was only for him. That was one of our first big problems. Once he gave me money to buy school supplies for Facundo. Just that week, Jose needed sneakers because the ones he had were destroyed. I used part of it. I didn't buy anything expensive, just some sneakers so he could go to school. When Facundo's father found out, he was furious. That money was for Facundo. Jose also needed things. Jose isn't my son. I always hated hearing that phrase. I replied, they're brothers, he lives under the same roof. He said he understood that, but he wasn't responsible for supporting Jose. From that moment on, he started giving me less and less cash. He bought directly what Facundo needed: clothes, supplies, food, medicine. And although he said he did it to ensure Facundo got his, for me it was another way to control me. Because if one month Jose needed something urgent, I could no longer adjust the money. Over time, Facundo started having things Jose didn't have. And yes, many times I asked him to share a sweatshirt, a pair of sneakers, some device. For me it was normal. They were brothers. For Facundo it never was. Everything of mine ends up being Jose's, he told me once. I thought he was exaggerating. Now I know he'd been feeling it for years. Jose started stealing around 14. The first time I found money hidden in his clothes. I asked him where he got it. He ended up confessing he'd taken money from some classmates, and I scolded him. I told him it was wrong and that they could get into trouble. But Jose started crying. You always say it's not enough. Then he gave me part of the money. It was to help you. That's where I probably did something many will consider unforgivable. I used part to buy food. I knew perfectly well where it came from, but I also saw my son trying to help me the only way he knew how. I told myself it would be once. It wasn't once. Then he started bringing more money, sometimes phones, clothes, things he clearly couldn't buy. At first I asked, then I stopped. I know that was wrong, but when you live counting every step and every penny, decisions don't always seem as clear as from the outside. Facundo noticed. He saw Jose bringing things, and that I wasn't asking questions. That worsened their relationship. That's why, when Facundo called him a thief that morning, it wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it was the first time I'd hit him for saying it. After the slap, he locked himself in his room for a long time. I thought he'd calmed down, but he hadn't. A little while later, he came out with his phone in his hand. He'd found the car video. He played it in front of us. Jose stopped moving. Facundo looked at the screens several times. Then he looked at the sweatshirt, then he looked at his brother, and finally he looked at me. Facundo put the phone on the table and asked something that made Jose look down. Why is the guy who stole that car wearing my clothes? For a few seconds, no one answered. I tried to stay calm. It might be a similar sweatshirt. Facundo looked at the video again. Mom, it's mine. Jose was still silent. Facundo looked at him directly. You grabbed it, right? Jose ended up nodding. I wore it last night. Facundo took a few seconds to understand. Then he looked at the video again. You stole that car. I told him to lower his voice. That seemed to make him even angrier. First you take my things, and now you're involving me in this. Jose told him no one was involving him in anything. You're wearing my clothes in a video where you steal a car. How are you not involving me? I intervened because I knew it would end in a fight. Jose didn't steal your sweatshirt. He needed it and he grabbed it. Facundo looked at me as if he couldn't believe what I had just said. He always needs something of mine. I didn't answer because I knew if we kept talking we'd end up bringing up things from years ago. The problem was we no longer had time to argue over a sweatshirt. That same day, something worse appeared. A neighbor shared the video on social media and wrote he thought he recognized the boy because he'd seen him several times in our area. Then someone commented asking if it wasn't one of the boys who lived near the street. When Jose saw it, he turned pale. He started pacing the dining room. They're going to find me, Mom. I told him they didn't know who he was yet, but they're close. And he was right. Until that moment, I had thought maybe everything would cool down, that the images weren't good, and that no one would be able to identify him. I could no longer trust that. That night I waited until I was alone with Facundo. I asked him to sit with me. I need you to help your brother. He immediately looked at me with distrust.
How?
I didn't know how to say it without it sounding horrible, so I was direct. You just have to say it was you. Facundo remained motionless. What? I explained that he was 16 years old. Jose was already 18 and had previous problems. If they identified Jose, he could end up in prison. They wouldn't do the same to you. Facundo got up from the chair. Are you listening to what you're asking me? I told him I wasn't saying there wouldn't be consequences, but he had his father. He had lawyers and he needed them. He had someone who would always protect him. Jose had none of that. Jose has a mother who covers up everything for him, he replied. I told him not to disrespect me. He stole a car, Mom. I know what he did, so he should take responsibility. I don't know why that phrase made me so angry. I reminded him of all the times Jose had brought money when we had none. Facundo blurted out, stolen money. I told him it was very easy to judge when he never had to worry about not having sneakers or food because his dad always appeared. Facundo replied, that's not my fault. I never said it was. Yes, you always say it without saying it. He tried to leave. I stopped him. If your dad had helped a little more with Jose when they were kids, maybe none of this would be happening. Facundo shook his head. Jose isn't my dad's son. I know. They've been reminding me my whole life. I told him we were a family. It was shown when sacrifices had to be made. He replied he'd been watching for years how everything of his ended up in Jose's hands. Now you want to give him my name too? That phrase seemed exaggerated to me. I wasn't trying to take his life. I was trying to prevent his brother from losing his. I told him, if you choose your dad over your brother, don't come talking to me about family later. Facundo was silent. I continued, and if Jose ends up in prison, I want you to remember you could have prevented it, right? He answered. He got up and went to his room. In the following days, I tried to talk to him more than once. He no longer argued with me like before. Sometimes he simply listened to me. I thought his silence meant he was finally understanding, but in reality Facundo had already started protecting himself from me. In the following days, I stopped asking him, as if it were an idea. I started talking as if it were something he would sooner or later have to accept. First I told him to think about it. Then I repeated that Jose depended on him, and when he still didn't give me an answer, I ended up telling him that if he didn't help, this family wouldn't be the same again. Facundo hardly argued anymore. That confused me. I thought he was coming to his senses. I didn't know his silence meant something else. Meanwhile, Jose was getting worse and worse. He hardly ever went out. He looked out the window every time he heard a car brake. One night, he asked me what I was doing to fix it. I told him I'd talked to Facundo, and he didn't want to help. Jose was silent. Then I explained exactly what I thought, that Facundo was a minor, that his father could get lawyers, that even if there were consequences, they wouldn't be comparable to what could happen to him. Jose looked at me. And what would they do to him? I told him I didn't know for sure, but it couldn't be worse than an adult conviction. I expected him to say no, to tell me it was crazy. He didn't, he stayed thinking. Then he asked, so, can you still talk to him? That phrase surprised me a bit, but I also understood he was scared. I didn't judge him, I just said I would try. Facundo heard part of the conversation. I don't know how much I knew, because he appeared in the kitchen afterwards. He looked at Jose. Do you also want me to say it was me? Jose replied no one was saying that. Facundo insisted. I'm asking you. Jose avoided looking at him. I don't want to go to prison. Facundo gave a short laugh. Neither do I. Then he looked at me, but that seems to matter less. I told him not to start again. He left without saying anything else. From then on, he started spending more time out of the house or locked in his room. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on the door. When I opened it, they were people involved in the car investigation. I felt like everything was falling apart. They showed me some images, the quality was bad, hood, sweatshirt, similar height. They asked me if I recognized the person. For a few seconds I could hear my own breathing. I could say I didn't know. I could say the images weren't clear. Or I could tell the truth. I thought about Jose, I thought about his 18 years, I thought about his record, I thought about a prison, and then I thought about Facundo. 16, his father, lawyers, a whole life still ahead. Then I pointed to the image. It's Facundo, my younger son. They asked me if he was home. I said no. What was he doing those days with his father? They took some data and left. When I closed the door, my hands were trembling. Jose came out of his room. What did you say? I replied it was already done. He didn't ask any more. For a few minutes, I felt relieved. I thought I had finally made a decision. Hours later, my phone rang. It was Facundo's father. As soon as I answered, he started yelling. What the hell did you do? Asked him to lower his voice. They came asking for Facundo about a stolen car. They said you identified him. I tried to explain it was a complicated matter. Facundo agreed to take responsibility. I didn't answer directly. I told him Jose could end up in prison. I asked you if Facundo agreed. I said we had talked. He said yes. I was silent. Then he understood. You used my son to save yours. I told him both were my sons. Then act like you care about both of them. That made me angry. I told him Facundo was a minor and he had resources to protect him. He replied, listen to me closely. If you try to use Facundo again to cover up what Jose did, Facundo won't sleep under your roof again. I told him he couldn't take my son away for a decision made in an emergency. And he replied, don't you know everything Facundo showed me yet? I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about messages. I had written strong things during those days, but nothing I couldn't explain. Then he told me, Facundo recorded you. I felt my stomach clench. It turns out that after our first argument, he had started recording some conversations with his phone. There were audios of me telling him, you just have to say it was you. Another where I explained that because he was a minor, the same thing wouldn't happen to him as to Jose, and another where it was perfectly clear. If your brother ends up in prison, it will be because you chose not to help. I didn't remember saying it exactly like that, or maybe I did, but at that moment I was desperate. Facundo's father said he also had new messages and they were ours. You can't take things I said under pressure and make it seem like I wanted to destroy his life. I don't have to make anything seem like anything. Your voice is heard. I tried to explain I was trying to save my son. He replied, which one of them? Then he hung up. From then on, everything started to fall too fast. Facundo declared he was somewhere else that night. His father could prove it. The lawyers delivered messages, recordings, and schedules. They also began to review Jose's previous problems. The sweatshirt no longer served to confuse anyone. Jose ended up detained. When they told me, I felt like something was being ripped out of me. Facundo returned a few days later, accompanied by his father to look for clothes. As soon as I saw him, I exploded. I hope you're happy. You sent your brother to jail. Facundo stared at me. I didn't send him. You could have saved him, Mom. He stole the car. I know what he did, so stop saying it was my fault. I replied, he didn't understand the difference. Jose was 18, had a record, and could lose years. Facundo was 16 and had a father with money for lawyers. You could recover, I told him. Facundo remained completely still. There it is. What? For you my life was worth less. I told him I had never thought that. You just said it. I tried to explain it wasn't the same, that he had more opportunities, that he had always had his father protecting him, but the more I tried to explain it, the further away he got. He grabbed his things and left. Jose's case progressed quickly. There was too much evidence, and his previous problems didn't help. His lawyer ended up recommending an abbreviated procedure. I was still hoping some way out would appear. It didn't appear. 5 years. When I heard that number, I thought of Jose entering at 18 and coming out a different person. I also thought of Facundo, I won't lie. I thought that if he had simply cooperated, none of this would be happening. Everyone told me Jose had made his own decisions, but no one seemed to understand that decisions had causes. And I still believed that many of those causes started years ago, when no one wanted to help us. I thought Jose's conviction was the worst thing that could happen. Again, I was wrong. Shortly after, I received a notification. Facundo's father was formally asking that Facundo stop living with me. He used practically everything: my statement, identifying Facundo, the messages, the audios, the pressure for him to take the blame. Even that recording where I said that if Jose went to prison it would be his responsibility. According to them, I was putting my own son at risk. That seemed absurd to me. I never wanted to harm him. I was just trying to choose the outcome where our family lost less. But now Jose was in prison and Facundo practically didn't want to see me. Facundo's father was determined to get him out of my house, and for the first time, I couldn't convince myself that everything would go back to normal. That's when I understood that trying to save one of my sons could end up alienating me from both of them. The fight for Facundo lasted almost 3 months. During that time, his father spent an amount of money that I still find hard to understand on lawyers and paperwork. And yes, I know it sounds bad to say it, but I couldn't stop thinking that if he had used that same effort to help us years ago, maybe Jose would never have ended up looking for money in another way. But no one wanted to hear that part. They only talked about the recordings, the messages, that I had pointed out Facundo knowing it hadn't been him. When they finally asked Facundo who he wanted to live with, I thought he would choose to stay with me. I'm his mother. I raised him. I was there when he had a fever, when he had problems at school, and when he needed anything, but he chose his father. When he told me, I felt like I couldn't breathe. After all I've done for you, are you going to abandon me too? Facundo looked at me, without raising his voice. I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to save myself. That phrase hurt me, because he spoke as if I were someone he had to escape from. Shortly after he came to pick up his things, his father was waiting outside. I tried to hug him before he left. Facundo remained stiff. He didn't even hug me back. Then he closed the door. Since then he lives with his father. Jose was in prison. Facundo barely spoke to me, and I was left alone. My economic situation also worsened. When Facundo lived with me, his father bought food, clothes, and other things that indirectly helped the house. Now everything is over, and Jose isn't around to bring money either. I know perfectly well how horrible that sounds to say after everything that happened, but it's the truth. Before, somehow or other we survived. Now no one helps me. On top of that, many people found out. A relative told me recently, you tried to sacrifice the son who was doing well to save the one who'd been stealing for years. That made me very angry because everyone keeps saying Jose was my favorite. I never had favorites. Jose simply needed me more. Facundo had his father, he had clothes, he had new things. If he needed something, his father appeared. Jose didn't have that. Jose only had me, and yes, he stole. I'm not denying it, but he was also my son. The son who often came and asked me if we were short on food. He was the one who saw I was desperate. Facundo never had to think about where the next penny would come from. That's why it still bothers me when they say I wanted to ruin his life. Facundo was 16. He had a father who could pay lawyers. He had a family on the other side who would take care of him. Jose was 18 and had a record. For me, the consequences weren't equal. That's all I was trying to explain. I also keep thinking about the slap that started everything. I know I shouldn't have hit him. I admit that, but I also don't think it was right for him to call his brother a thief, as if that word summarized his whole life. Yes, Jose stole, but he was still his brother, and he was still my son. Everyone told me, and tells me I destroyed this family. I don't feel it's that simple. Jose made bad decisions. Facundo's father decided never to help with anything that had to do with Jose. Facundo decided not to protect his brother. Then he decided to record me. Then he chose to leave. And it seems that of all those decisions, the only one that matters is mine. Sometimes I look at the empty house and think everything would have been different if one of them had given in a little. Jose lost 5 years. I lost both my sons, and Facundo moved on with his father, as if none of this was also his responsibility. So you tell me, was I really the one who destroyed this family, Or did Facundo also make a decision knowing perfectly well what was going to happen to his brother? End of story. For me, the worst wasn't just that she tried to blame Facundo for something Jose did, but that she still convinced Facundo owed her that sacrifice. For years she justified Jose, accepted stolen money, and took things from one son to give to the other. And when everything exploded, she wanted to take away even his freedom. Facundo didn't destroy his family by refusing to bear a crime that wasn't his. The mother destroyed it from the moment she confused helping Jose with protecting him from all the consequences of his actions. Besides, a mother's responsibility for a child falls on her. Since Facundo had his father, his mother should have looked after Jose. Comment 1. Your son literally said, "Jose is a thief," and your defense is, "Yes, he steals, but I don't like how it sounds when he says it out loud." Madam, that's not an accusation, it's a job description. Mother's response. I'm not saying Jose didn't steal. I'm saying Facundo said it with the intention of humiliating him. There's a difference. Jose did bad things because we were in need, not because he enjoyed being a criminal. Comment 2. Let's see if I understand. You took things from Facundo to give to Jose. Jose started stealing and you accepted his money. Then Jose stole a car using Facundo's clothes and your solution was, well, since we're using his stuff, let's also use his criminal record. This escalated from sharing a sweatshirt to sharing a conviction pretty quickly. Comment 3. It kills me that you still blame Facundo's father. The guy. I'm going to support my son. You. And why don't you also support the son I had with another man after cheating on you? The level of customer service you expected from your ex was impressive. Mother's response. I never said he had a legal obligation to Jose. I was talking about humanity. He saw they were brothers and that one had much more than the other. He could have helped voluntarily instead of always limiting himself to saying, he's not my son. Comment 4. Facundo. Everything of mine ends up in Jose's hands. Mom. How exaggerated. Jose, 5 minutes later uses his sweatshirt, his identity, and almost his freedom too. Facundo wasn't exaggerating. He was making a trailer for the final season. Comment 5. The most disturbing thing isn't even that you tried to incriminate him. It's that your argument is still, Facundo had a better life, so he could afford for me to ruin a piece of it. That's not treating two children equally. That's punishing the one who's better off because the other made worse decisions. Mother's response. I didn't want to ruin anything for him. That's the point everyone ignores. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. I ordered a new tag while my son was still calling for Bruno, my dog. I told him a dog doesn't define anyone, but that night it was the only thing he lost. My name's Mariana, I'm 40. I'm the mother of Gabriel, who's 17, and the stepmother of Camila, who's 14. It all started when I decided to officially give my son's dog to my stepdaughter after suspecting he was causing problems at home. Said like that, it sounds cold. At the time, it didn't seem so to me. At that moment, I felt I was putting things in order, that I was rewarding the one who really deserved it. When I married Rodrigo, I thought the hardest part would be adjusting schedules, habits, spaces. A blended family doesn't come together like a perfect puzzle. I knew that. Gabriel was 13 then, and already had his character well formed. He always compared our house to how it was before. That phrase scraped me on the inside more than I want to admit, as if I were an intruder in his story. Bruno had arrived when Gabriel was 10. We adopted him together. I remember that afternoon, the smell of disinfectant at the shelter, the clumsy puppy that wouldn't stop wagging its tail. Gabriel held him as if he were something fragile and valuable. The first week they slept on the living room floor because he said the dog was scared. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see them there, tangled in an old blanket, breathing at the same rhythm. For years they were inseparable. Camila came to live with us a year ago. Organized, diligent, sweet in appearance. From the first day she'd ask if I needed help, set the table without being asked, organized her notebooks as if they were museum pieces. I'd look at her and feel relief. Bruno started following her. He'd sit at her feet while she studied. Sometimes he'd go with her to her room and stay there for hours. I'd see it and think, what a contrast. Gabriel spent more time locked up. Video games, headphones, short answers. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't close either. Sometimes he'd close the door a little harder than necessary. I interpreted every gesture as a challenge, every silence as a voluntary distance. One day money was missing from my wallet. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to worry me. Rodrigo said quietly that Gabriel had been very quiet lately. That phrase stuck in my head like a mosquito. He didn't accuse directly, but he implied. And I filled an arrest. I confronted him. He looked me straight in the eye and said he didn't take anything without hesitating. That confidence annoyed me more than if he had hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe I expected him to look down, to break a little. He didn't. That same afternoon, Camila cried. She said that sometimes she was afraid to be left alone with him, that he gets very angry. She didn't say he had done anything to her, just that. He gets angry. And that phrase stuck in my head like a warning I had to heed. From then on, everything out of place seemed like a sign to me. A broken glass, a missing notebook. If Bruno made a mess, I'd punish Gabriel. I'd tell him he didn't train him well. He'd close the door without arguing. That passivity began to drive me crazy, as if his silence was a more sophisticated form of defiance. I kept telling myself I was being fair, that I was protecting Camila, that I was maintaining order, and without realizing it, I began to redistribute small things, privileges, spaces, glances. Camila's birthday was approaching, and she mentioned she'd never had a pet of her own. She said it in that soft voice that doesn't demand but suggests. I'd see how she bathed Bruno, how she walked him, how she talked to him as if he were hers. Gabriel, on the other hand, seemed distant, or that's what I wanted to see. I made a decision that at the time felt logical. If she takes care of him, she deserves him. That's how I reasoned it. That's how I justified it. I ordered a new tag. Bruno with a heart and Camila's name engraved. I picked it up in secret, held it in my hands, and felt I was doing something right, as if I were balancing an invisible scale. I posted photos saying she finally had the pet she deserved. During dinner, when I gave her the tag, Camila smiled. Rodrigo clapped softly. Gabriel didn't touch his plate, didn't say a word, not a complaint, not a scene. That lack of reaction made me more uncomfortable than any scream. That night, he came into my room. He didn't knock loudly. He just opened the door and stood there in the semi-darkness. He told me Bruno was the only thing that felt like his in that house. He said it without reproach, almost like a fact. I replied that a dog doesn't define who you are, that he was too old for whims. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just nodded. And in that gesture, there was something I couldn't read at that moment. The next day, I changed the tag, and something else started to change, although I didn't want to see it yet. The days after the birthday had a strange calm, like after a storm when that heavy air that won't quite go away remains. Camila took Bruno everywhere. She bought him a new leash with her own money, or so she said. He slept with him in her room. She posted photos hugging him. I reacted to each one with a heart, as if I were celebrating something I'd done well. Gabriel stopped mentioning him. That was the first thing I noticed. Before he'd say, "Have you seen Bruno?" or "I'm going to take Bruno out." Suddenly, he started saying the dog. That distance in the way he named him made me uncomfortable, but I turned it into proof of maturity. I kept telling myself he was accepting the decision. One afternoon, I found Bruno scratching at the door of the small room, the one I'd assigned to Gabriel after turning his into a study room for Camila. It was another decision I made, convinced I was being practical. She needed space. He could adapt. He had always adapted. When I announced the room change, Gabriel only asked if it was temporary. I said yes, that it was for organizational purposes, that Camila would make good use of it. He didn't protest. He collected his things in silence. I saw him put away the old blanket he used with Bruno when he was a puppy. He didn't say anything about it. The small room barely fit a bed and a folding desk. There were boxes stacked in a corner. I promised him we'd remove them soon. It was never temporary. Rodrigo avoided getting too involved. When I asked him if he didn't think it was an exaggeration, he replied that he trusted my judgment. That phrase gave me authority. It also gave me a kind of permission to continue. The missing money never turned up. I looked at Gabriel with suspicion, even though I had no proof. Every time he went out with friends, my mind filled in stories, expenses, anger, rebellion. I didn't talk about it openly, but my questions were sharper. Camila, on the other hand, was grateful. She said she felt calmer at home now, that Bruno slept better, that the atmosphere had been tense. That word appeared again, tension, as if the tension had a name of its own. One night, while we were having dinner, Bruno went over to Gabriel and rested his muzzle on his knee. It was a small, almost automatic gesture. Gabriel petted him for just a few seconds and then pulled his hand away. Not with anger, with care, as if he were afraid of doing something wrong. I interpreted that gesture as detachment, as proof that he didn't care that much anymore. I convinced myself I'd made the right decision. The weeks went by, and the house started to feel different. No more loud door slams, no more arguments. Gabriel spent more time out. He said he was studying at a friend's house. I'd nod. I thought the small space was pushing him to be more social. I saw it as an unexpected benefit. But there were details, small details that were piling up. Bruno would sometimes wait by the front door when Gabriel was late coming back. He'd whine softly. Camila would say it was a habit, that he'd get over it. I wanted to believe her. One afternoon, I heard Camila talking on the phone in her room. She was laughing. She said that now everything was in its place, that things had changed. I didn't quite understand the context, but the phrase stuck with me. The money never appeared, and I never asked Gabriel directly about it again. I figured if he'd taken it, the message had been sent. If he hadn't, his silence was suspicious. In any case, I had already made up my mind. I started to notice something else. Camila asked for more things, clothes, outings, extended permissions, and I gave them to her. She was diligent, she was responsible. Or, at least that's what I wanted to keep seeing. Gabriel, on the other hand, stopped asking. That puzzled me. He didn't even complain about the room, or the money, or Bruno. One night, I walked into the kitchen and found him standing in front of the sink, staring blankly into space. I asked him if he was okay. He said yes, always yes. Weeks later, while Camila and I were looking at photos of Bruno on her phone, Gabriel appeared in the doorway. He looked at both of us. There was something in his expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, it wasn't obvious sadness, it was something else, a kind of silent decision. He said, "It's okay, just that." And although at that moment I interpreted those words as definitive acceptance, there was an emptiness in the way he said them that left me unsettled, as if he wasn't talking about the dog, as if he were closing something much bigger without needing to say it. I had trouble sleeping that night, not out of guilt, not yet, but because of a strange feeling that something was moving beneath the surface, and I didn't have the absolute control I thought I had. The next morning, the house woke up to silence, a deeper silence than before, and I still didn't understand what was about to happen. It wasn't immediate. Gabriel didn't leave the next day, nor did he make a scene. In fact, for a while everything remained the same, or at least it seemed so from the outside. I continued with my routine, Camila with hers, Rodrigo avoiding conflict as if it didn't exist, but something in me started to shift, a discomfort I couldn't name. Sometimes I'd find myself remembering that first week with Bruno, when Gabriel slept on the floor so the puppy wouldn't be scared. That image would come back unbidden. It bothered me, because it clashed with the version I had built in my head. The one where he was distant, problematic, capable of taking money without admitting it. I'd try to justify myself. I'd tell myself that people change, that a loving child can become a withdrawn teenager, that protecting Camila was my priority. And yet, there were details that didn't quite fit. The day I found the old blanket at the back of the small room's closet, I stared at it for a while. It was folded carefully, not thrown, not wrinkled. Gabriel hadn't made a fuss. He hadn't broken anything. He hadn't sought revenge in any way. He had simply reduced his presence, as if he were taking up the minimum possible space, so as not to be in the way. That started to worry me more than any argument. There was one afternoon when I saw him from the window. He was sitting on the front step waiting for Camila to come back from an outing so Bruno could come in. The dog was inside her room, and the door was closed. Gabriel didn't knock. He didn't complain, he just waited for someone else to decide. I wondered at what point he had gone from being the dog's owner to asking for permission with his eyes, but immediately my mind defended itself. I hadn't taken anything essential from him. I had told him clearly that a dog doesn't define who you are. He still had his family, his house, his studies. Wasn't that enough? I clung to that logic as if it were a life raft in the middle of the water, until everything shattered with a sentence from Rodrigo. It was an ordinary night. We were alone in the kitchen. I mentioned, almost as a passing comment, that we never got the money back. Rodrigo sighed and said he had taken it to cover a debt, that he didn't want to worry us. He said it without drama, as if he were talking about the weather. I stared at him, not understanding. At first I asked him if Gabriel knew. Rodrigo shook his head. He said he didn't see the need to say anything now that it had already passed. In that moment, I felt something cold run down my spine. It wasn't anger towards Rodrigo. It was something worse. It was the image of Gabriel looking me straight in the eye, saying he didn't take anything. And me, convinced I was teaching him firmness. I didn't know what to say. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just felt as if that information rewrote entire months of decisions. I didn't sleep that night. I kept telling myself I couldn't have known the truth, that I acted on the information I had, but deep down I knew it wasn't just the information, it was the inclination, the predisposition to believe one version over another. I thought about the tag, about the post, about the scene where he didn't touch his plate. I thought about the small room, about every time I punished him for a mess he might not have even caused. And I wondered if I was really protecting someone, or if I was trying to validate the idea that my new family worked better. Infections. I called him the next day. He didn't answer. I wrote him a simple message, not mentioning the money yet. I just wanted to know how he was. It was left on read. Hours passed, then days. In the midst of that wait, I started to notice changes in Camila. She'd come home later. Her answers were less sweet. One afternoon, I found a charge on my card I didn't recognize. When I asked her, she said she thought it wouldn't be a problem, that I was always looking for culprits when something went wrong. That sentence cut me to the core. You're always looking for culprits. It was exactly what I had done, looked for a responsible party that fit my fears, my discomfort with my son's silence, my need for the house to have a clear order. For the first time, I doubted my own narrative. Not in public, not in front of Rodrigo, not in front of Camila, just in that internal conversation one tries to avoid because it's too uncomfortable. I started to see the birthday scene from the outside. Me giving the tag, Camila smiling, Gabriel in silence, and I wondered if I was really rewarding responsibility or if I was sending a deeper message. One that said his place could be replaced. And the worst part is, I had no way to undo it. Every time I looked at Bruno lying in Camila's room, I felt a strange pang. Not because the dog was unhappy, he seemed to be adapting. Dogs adapt. It's us who get stuck. I tried to call him again. This time I wrote that we needed to talk. He didn't answer. And then I understood something that was hard for me to accept. Gabriel hadn't left the day he walked out with a backpack. He had left much earlier. Maybe the night I told him a dog doesn't define who you are. Maybe even before, when I started looking at him as a suspect. That idea wouldn't leave me alone, but I still didn't know how much more I was going to lose. Gabriel left one afternoon without making a sound. There was no slammed door, no final argument to justify anything, just a backpack leaning against the door and that calm that was now familiar to me. Rodrigo tried to say something, but Gabriel was already crossing the threshold when he mumbled that he was going to a friend's house. He gave no more details. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't complain about anything. Bruno scratched the floor when he left. That dry, repetitive sound stuck with me. Camila said he would sleep peacefully now, that there would be no more tension in the house. I nodded, not because I was convinced, but because I didn't know what else to do. The house became silent in a different way. Before it was a charged silence. Now it was hollow. There were no forgotten headphones on the table or misplaced slippers in the entryway. The small room remained untouched, as if it had been a temporary stop for someone who never fully settled in. I tried to call him that same night. He didn't answer. I wrote to him that we could talk whenever he wanted. Nothing. Rodrigo said he needed space, that at 17 you exaggerate things. I wanted to believe him, but there was something in the way Gabriel had said, "It's okay," weeks earlier, that now sounded different in my head, like a premature farewell. The following days were uncomfortable. Camila seemed lighter. She went out more. She'd come home late with excuses she wouldn't have given before. One afternoon, I found another charge on my card, this time larger. When I confronted her, she didn't cry. She didn't seem fragile. She looked me straight in the eye and said that I myself had taught her that those who take care of things deserve them. That sentence took my breath away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't know how. It was as if every argument I tried to use came back as an echo of my own decisions. I had redistributed affections, spaces, privileges based on a suspicion. Now I was facing consequences I couldn't control with authority. Rodrigo avoided the subject of Gabriel. When I mentioned his name, he'd change the conversation or say he'd be back soon. But weeks passed and there was no return. The small room started to gather dust. I didn't go in. I didn't want to see the neatly made bed, as if it were waiting for someone who didn't plan on coming back. One night, I looked at the photos from Camila's birthday, the tag shining under the dining room light, the engraved heart, my firm, almost proud smile. Gabriel in the background, out of focus. I dwelled on that image longer than I should have. I wondered if, at that moment, I had already crossed an invisible line. Bruno changed too. He didn't stop loving Camila, but he started to spend more time at the front door. Sometimes he'd lie down in front of the empty room, scratching softly. I'd tell him he'd get used to it, but the truth is that every sound reminded me of what I had done. I tried to talk to Camila about the card. I told her there were limits. She replied that before I didn't doubt her so much that it seemed I was waiting for her to fail. That observation hurt me more than I wanted to show. I started to notice I was losing authority on both fronts. With Gabriel, it was already obvious. With Camila, it was starting to be. What I thought was firmness now looked like something more fragile, almost improvised. One afternoon, without warning, I went to the address of the friend where Gabriel was supposedly staying. He wasn't there. They told me he hadn't been by in days. I felt a cold emptiness in my stomach. Rodrigo said he was probably somewhere else, that I shouldn't dramatize, but the fact of not knowing for sure where my son was sleeping made me face something I had avoided. I had lost the control I had tried so hard to maintain. I went home and found Bruno sitting in front of the door. Camila wasn't there. I called her. She didn't answer. Hours passed before she came back, smiling, without giving too many explanations. In that moment, I understood that the house was no longer the orderly space I had wanted to build. It was a place where everyone did what they could, without fully trusting each other. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. I looked at the new tag resting on the table. I touched it with my fingers. The engraving was still shiny. I thought about the old blanket, the small room, the phrase I repeated with such confidence. A dog doesn't define anyone, and yet everything started to break from there. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic scene to close the story, just accumulated decisions that could no longer be undone and the increasingly clear feeling that the loss had not been an accident, but the direct consequence of something I myself had initiated. Over time, I understood that absence weighs more than any argument. The house is still standing, the walls haven't moved, the furniture is still where I left it, but there are spaces that are no longer filled. The small room remains almost untouched, as if it were still waiting for someone to come back, for something they forgot. Sometimes I go in, open the window, let the air circulate, I don't touch anything else. Gabriel didn't come back. I tried to write to him several times. At first short, neutral messages, then longer ones. I even told him the truth about the money. I explained it wasn't him, that I found out later, that I should have known sooner. The messages are left on read. That little notification became a kind of silent sentence. He's there, he's read it, but he doesn't respond. Rodrigo insists that time fixes everything. I'm not so sure anymore, because time doesn't erase the image of a new tag given as a symbol of merit. It doesn't erase the moment I turned his room into a study for Camila. It doesn't erase the night he told me Bruno was the only thing that felt like his, and I responded, as if I were correcting a whim. Camila changed too. She goes out more. She comes home late, uses my card without notice. When I confront her, she doesn't break down. She looks me straight in the eye and asks why I'm so strict now. If before I rewarded without hesitation. In her voice, there's no longer that constant sweetness, there's defiance. Sometimes I think it's not malice, it's learning. Bruno sleeps in her room, but some nights he comes down and waits by the front door. He doesn't scratch as much as before, he just waits. I watch him from the sofa and wonder if animals understand loss better than we do. I found out Rodrigo took the money to cover a debt. He admitted it without drama. He never said anything to Gabriel. That detail haunts me, because if he had spoken up sooner, maybe I would have acted differently. Or maybe not. Maybe I had already decided who to believe even before I had reasons. I thought I was rewarding responsibility. Maybe I just chose who to believe. Sometimes I mentally review every decision as if I could find the exact point where everything went wrong. It wasn't a single act, it was a sum. Suspicion after suspicion, comparison after comparison. I redistributed affections as if they were interchangeable objects, as if moving a tag and a room didn't mean moving a place in the heart. And now the silence isn't tension, it's absence. I don't know if Gabriel will come back. I don't know if he'll ever want to sit across from me and hear that I was wrong. What I do know is that there are things that can't be undone with a late apology. Authority without listening looks too much like abandonment, even if you don't want to see it. Sometimes I stare at that shiny tag and think about the phrase I repeated with such confidence. A dog doesn't define who you are, but losing it the way I did ended up defining what I was willing to sacrifice to feel like I had control. If exercising authority without listening seems like firmness, at what point does it become abandonment? Popular comments. Anonymous comment. 1. You took something from him that was stability. It wasn't just a pet, it was a bond that came from before your new family. You can't replace that by moving a tag.
Ops response.
I know it was more than a dog to him. At the time I didn't want to see it that way. Now it's impossible to ignore. Anonymous comment 2. I'm impressed he took the blame without proof. Sometimes a teenager's silence isn't rebellion, it's exhaustion. It seems you judged him before listening.
Ops response.
I acted before I had the full truth. And yes, I confused his silence with something worse. Anonymous comment 3. Rodrigo also had a responsibility in this. He insinuated things and then hid the truth about the money. But the final decision was yours.
Ops response.
He should have clarified sooner, but I was the one who took every measure inside the house. Anonymous comment 4. The social media post must have hurt him a lot. You made a decision that displaced in public. That leaves a mark.
Ops response.
I didn't think about how it would make him feel to see it in photos. I focused on celebrating Camila and didn't see the impact. Anonymous comment 5. Changing his room was symbolic. You reduced his physical and emotional space at the same time. That weighs more than it seems.
Ops response.
I thought I was organizing the house. Now I understand what it represented for him. Anonymous comment 6. It's hard to read that he stopped fighting. When someone stops arguing, they've often already given up. That silence speaks loudly.
Ops response.
That silence is what weighs on me the most. I wish I had understood what it meant sooner. Anonymous comment 7. I also see that Camila learned something from all this. If you reward without question, it's hard to set limits later. The dynamics repeat themselves. OP's response. It's hard for me to admit, but I think I projected too much onto her, and that changed our relationship. Anonymous comment 8. The phrase, "You're always looking for culprits," sums up a lot. Maybe you were trying to maintain an image of order at any cost. OP's response. Yes, I preferred a comfortable version rather than facing doubts that made me uncomfortable. Anonymous comment 9. Not everything is fixed with time. Sometimes it takes a clear apology and accepting what happened without excuses, even if it doesn't guarantee anything.
Ops response.
I'm trying to find the right way to do it. I know a late apology doesn't erase what I did. Anonymous comment 10. Losing control hurts, but losing the bond hurts more. I hope you can rebuild something before it's too late.
Общ response.
That's what I fear the most, that when I want to rebuild, there will be nothing left to hold on to.